Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about grounding your personal perspectives. This is a webinar in our Writing as a Nurse series of webinars designed especially for our graduate students in nursing. If you are wondering about other webinars that we have available, we've got a bunch more coming up this term being offered for the first time, and we always post the recordings of our webinars online, so we have a full catalog available. If you're not familiar with Writing Center, please feel free to visit our Writing Center website for more details. I'll talk through a couple key elements here. First, you can see some of the webinars that are coming up. If you RSVP for any webinar, regardless if it's in your program, we will send you a link to the recording when it becomes available and a copy of the slide deck. So if you see something, for example, you might look at the Writing for Healthcare Administration webinar coming up and say, oh, well, I need to do a PowerPoint presentation in my class, or I'd like to know a little bit more about that. And you might even be working at 7 p.m. on Thursday the 2nd. But if you RSVP for the webinar, we will send you a link to the recording automatically. Same thing if you have to step out early. Here's a small sampling of some of the webinars that we have available, but I also wanted to show you a new thing that we have available on the Writing Center website. So I pulled up our webinar page here, and you'll see we have information on how to RSVP. We have links for joining the webinars. We have a list of upcoming webinars for this term. And at the bottom, there's an alphabetical listing. Well, something new that we added, because we have so many webinar recordings available, we have this tabbed guide here. So if you're, say, in a nursing course and you're wondering, well, what else do you have for me? You can see, sorted by class, the different resources available. And so for Nursing 733, for example, right now, we have a pair of webinars that tie in with different assignments here. And once this recording is finished, it will be added to this catalog as well. So we keep this updated dynamically. But if you start the term and you look and you see, oh, there are a couple things coming up. So for week 5, I want to go ahead and just put a calendar note to watch this. Great, awesome. All right, let us go back to our slides now, and let's dive into our main presentation. So we're going to be walking through 3 different areas for this webinar. First, we're going to start with exploring how to write about personal perspectives, just something that you're discouraged from doing in many classes for good reasons and wanting to guide you through writing particular types of arguments. But there are times where this comes up, and this is something you do want to do. Then we're going to dive specifically into the Nursing 733 Week 1 assignment, and we're going to finish with a discussion about how to outline and draft this paper. All right, so how do you write about personal perspective in APA style? Well, let's start with some do's and don'ts. So yes, you can and should use first-person singular phrasing to identify you and things that you own, like your beliefs. So what is first-person singular? That's I, my, me. I believe that whatever you do, my personal belief is this. My house is X. Now, while that is allowed and encouraged, in fact required when you're describing yourself, you are also discouraged from, actually you're not allowed in APA style to use certain phrasings. So in most contexts, you're not allowed to use the first person plural, the we. You are allowed to do it when you're like describing your work on a research team, for example, but very narrow. You need to clearly identify the group there. You certainly can't use it as we, meaning, oh, people of the world, or all nurses everywhere. Similarly, don't use the global you. You should do X. Well, unless you are quoting the transcript of what you'll say to a patient, you wouldn't be using you phrasing in APA style. Similarly, don't use third person to refer to yourself and work that you do. In fact, there's a specific prohibition written into the APA manual to not refer to yourself as the researcher and similar things like that. So don't use the DNP student either as a stand-in for talking about yourself. Now, how does it come up? Well, of course, there are discussion posts where you're asked to give your perspective. But in this particular case, and in many other assignments, you're asked to use personal perspective as part of giving an argument, of convincing your reader that something should happen or that something is present. So how do you do that? Well, you can, of course, refer anecdotally to your own experience and observations, but often the most convincing argument is going to be combining both personal perspective and scholarly research. And these hybrid arguments that you make are going to be used often to justify or explain the need for things like quality improvement projects, which many of you will write as part of this program and possibly write as part of your DNP project or the nucleus of your DNP project. And when you're doing this, you're going to be working with different types of evidence, and you want to show that you're combining that, you're creating new meaning, that you're synthesizing this information using a piece of phrasing that we call logical bridges. So what's a logical bridge? Well, that's a phrase that tells how information connects to what has been discussed before. In this particular case, we're going to be focusing on logical bridges that suggest synthesis. This is phrasing like, because of this, as a result, therefore, in consequence. And quick note on the slide, that's the verb there, Williams recommend, that should be recommended past tense, because remember, we are going to be referring to things people have said and done in the past using past tense, because that's what APA style requires. So if you just say Williams 2021 recommended that blah, well, recommended, that's a recommendation, that so you're stating something, that's you're summarizing what they recommended, and so what is the function? Is functioning as evidence towards your argument. Now, if you just follow that with a statement, the hospital should blah blah blah, it would not be clear how that connected to that earlier evidence. Now, in APA style, what we should do is then put in a logical bridge so it's clear how it connects. I will say that not every writing style takes this point of view. There are, in fact, some schools of writing that believe that filling in the dots like that would be insulting to a reader, and so you shouldn't do it. And I'm reminded of this when I read many French academic journals, for example, where they assume you will fill in the dots. Well, APA style, because it is used for scientific writing, where we want to make absolutely sure that people don't misinterpret things and get the right meaning, the desired communication, we clarify that by putting in things like these logical bridges to make that connection clear. In the second example, Williams 2021 recommended that blah. This aligns with Hans 2020 a recommendation that this other thing. Therefore, I recommend that the hospital should whatever it is. So in this second example, the first sentence is giving evidence. The second is not just giving further evidence for Hans 2020 recommendation, but it's analyzing it. So that has a logical bridge this aligns with, which is saying, oh, yes, these two work together. They reinforce each other. And so that gives a sense of you've looked at a balance of sources when you come in with your recommendation and have that logical bridge. Therefore, I recommend that the hospital, whatever you're recommending. So using in your own experience or your own judgment to derive these recommendations is going to be more convincing if you show that you are using a variety of sources, which can be a mix of your personal observations and scholarly sources. Some other examples of phrasing that you might use. We'll read through this first and then break it down. I believe that public health officials should require whatever. In my 15 years of experience as a nurse in an urban public health clinic serving a low SES population, many patients have whatever they did. As a result, I believe that author's recommendation to do this thing will be ineffective. Therefore, I recommend that X. So the first statement is giving a basic belief. It's making a claim, public health officials should X. And it's clarifying, it's stating right at the beginning that this is a personal belief that you're relaying. And then because you don't want to just people to believe you because you said it, you want to convince them, give them a basis for believing you, well, you give evidence. So that in my 15 years of experience as a nurse in this setting, that's basically naming your professional qualifications and saying, oh, in that context, I have seen many patients have whatever. And then the next, as a result, so we've got that saying, okay, because of those things, I believe that this author's recommendation will be ineffective. And bringing that together, therefore, I recommend this course of action, which is probably going to be a little bit more specific than the claim made in the very first sentence. You can also use my to construct a statement, especially when responding directly to a prompt. My personal perspective on the US healthcare system is that it is, let's say, poorly managed and in need of reforms to reduce something or other. All right, let's delve specifically into the assignment at hand this week. So again, this is an assignment from Nursing 733, Healthcare Reform, Current Issues Affecting Nursing Practice. Well, as it happens, we are in one of those years where the broad American public is developing and stating a lot of ideas about what nurses should and shouldn't do. So I'm sure that there are ample things you could draw on this year. Let's look at the assignment itself. So this asks you to give a cohesive summary of your perspective. Now let's focus on that word cohesive. So cohesive means it sticks together, that it is coherent, and basically that you have an interlocking argument of here's what it is and here why it is, here's what it means. All right, so you're supposed to write a cohesive summary, and there are 4 specific bullets about what you should do. You should identify your personal perspective regarding the current state of the US healthcare system. Research to find an organization or prominent figure in the industry who holds a differing perspective than your own. Write a minimum 2-page summary of your own perspective of the US healthcare system, including healthcare reform. And in that summary, respond to the chosen organization or person's perspective, explaining how you agree or disagree with their points of view, and cite evidence as to why you disagree or agree. Now, this is a little bit jumbled in how the information is separated if you look at this as a list of requirements, because the first 2 are more prep. And then the third bullet is saying, okay, here's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be writing a 2-page paper, and here's what you should do. And the last one is a note that you should specifically be citing evidence and citing scholarly sources to back you up here. Now, if we look at the rubric, which I always recommend that you do, this has a reinforcement of that. So we have the requirement for 10% of the grade that you identify your personal perspective on this. Then another 20% is that you're showing that you have researched a perspective, and that's going to be documenting their perspective, writing about it, of an organization or prominent figure in the industry who holds a differing perspective than your own. And you're going to be responding to that perspective, again, for 20% of your grade, explaining how you disagree or agree. And you're also supposed to be citing evidence. That's going to be another 20%, and staying within the guidelines for AP formatting, including your citations and references. And also that you will be writing clearly and making sure you proofread and all that stuff. But our main thing is going to be that stating your perspective, stating someone else's, responding to it, and backing up your response with evidence. So that is 4 things. 3 of which are content areas. The 4th is a how you do it, how you phrase it kind of thing. So another way to look at this is half of the points here are for getting those 3 content things. And then the other half is, have you written it well and in APA style? Okay, so let's look at what this might look like based on what we've seen so far. And so I think it's always good to go ahead and check the notes, check the assignment instructions, the rubric, and then write it out so you know exactly what you have to do. So the length is going to be a minimum of 2 pages. It's not requiring that it be a maximum of 2, but minimum of 2 pages of content. So that's not counting the title page, not counting the references. And then we can use the rubric and the instructions to draft a rough outline. Of course, we're going to have an introduction. We won't put in a heading for that because APA style says don't do that, but we will have an introduction where you state what you're doing and give a brief outline of the paper's main content areas. Then the 3 main content areas, which are to say your personal perspective, the research on a differing perspective, and the response to those. After that, you're going to have a brief conclusion, and then your references pages, of course. And just looking at this, so the introduction and the conclusion are probably going to be shorter paragraphs, maybe a third of a page each. And so that leaves us with approximately a page and a third minimum, which is to say that that's looking at approximately 1 paragraph of 5 to 7 sentences each for these 3 things. So it's not going to be a long paper, but you do want to make sure that you start out with a direct answer to each of these content area prompts. All right, so before we go further, let's go ahead and talk about how to find someone else's perspective here. Now, there aren't any particular restrictions here on the types of sources, but if you are researching an individual or an organization's opinion, it may be a non-scholarly source. So let's just say that you wanted to respond to something from a politician in your state or at some level of government. Let's say you are wanting to cite something from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Now, I don't know what your personal beliefs are on that, but let's talk about where you might find those statements. Now, this is one of those things where there are, of course, things that he has published, but whenever you're in that kind of leadership thing, you are often having your statements being presented through different outlets, whether it's a government agency or whether it is something that you are looking up from news media. And in this case, there's certain things that are more authoritative, and news media tends to quote selectively. So keep that in mind if you go searching for that. So I've gone ahead and I've done a search for Anthony Fauci statement. You can insert a particular topic and we'll see, oh, the National Institutes for Health has a list of interviews and news articles. So we could go ahead and start with that and see, okay, press briefing. So that would definitely be something where you could find opinions from a public figure. And this is true whether you are looking for a public health official in a particular state or a governor. They tend to give a lot of information in press conferences or press briefings. So let's look at this one and then we'll talk about how to cite it. So it looks like we have a transcript of this. So this is published on the White House website. It is a press briefing transcript. And we have various people cited here. So the details of this don't matter. what I'd like to show is how you would cite this sort of source in APA style. And let's go ahead and see if we can find. All right, so we have this section here where there are the remarks attributed to Dr. Fauci. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a copy of our APA course paper template, and I'm going to walk you through how to cite this particular type of source and how to reference it. So first off, we're going to go ahead and get that copy of the paper. All right, now I have queued up here a copy of our APA course paper template. We've got various blank areas for you to fill in later. Let's not worry about that. Our interest is how to cite that specific source. And if we go ahead and look around in our web browser, we'll find that there are certain things that we want to keep in mind. So if we go to the APA Style L Central website, there are a variety of different things, different guidelines here, and our question is partly to find what is the most applicable thing, because this isn't, something that was formally published, but it is a transcript from a talk with the press. We even see that as press briefing. So if we look at this, its closest analog here is going to be press release. And you might say that the briefing transcript has been released as a press release. So this is our analog here. So first, who made it available? In this case, this is going to be the White House. Then we'll need the when it was made. This was published. Going to have the title for it. We'll have a note in square brackets, and we're going to use press briefing here because that's what it was. And then we're going to have a link straight to that. All right, so with this particular source here, oh, I'm sorry, I am led to believe that there was a problem with the sharing there. Let me do that part again. Okay, you should now see my screen. All right, so we have this press briefing here. And in many cases in APA style, you'll find something that it's a particular example that is not quite exactly fitting into something, but you want to go with the closest category because there are literally hundreds of different ways that information can be made available. And the important thing is that it be clear what something is and how to access it. So if we're looking in the APA Style Central list of examples here, and we'll start with textual works because we are looking at a set of text, you'll see that there is not a press briefing thing here. But this is what we call gray literature, so it's not peer-reviewed stuff. It's a transcript of a briefing that the White House did. Now, our closest analog is going to be the press release. So we're going to go take a look at that, and then I'll tell you how to adapt that. So the press release has who made it available. In this case, the example has the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. In our example here, that's the White House that made this available. The year, month, and day that was done, we can look at this and see this is a transcript for August 18th, 2021. What's it called? Well, in this case, we have this title here. And instead of press release, we'll have press briefing in square brackets, and then a link to that. So let's now go to the Word document and let's go ahead and fill in this information. So this is going to be, who's our author here? This is going to be the White House, and this is going to be 2021. And then this was a press briefing from August 18th. So we have the year first, then the month, and then we have the day, period. Now we're going to have the title of that. And if you just paste that in, yeah, you'll get some formatting and things. Whoops. You'll get some formatting stuff that you don't want. So click on this little button here and set that to keep text only. And so we'll get the text with whatever capitalization it had in the original source. Now let's look at this and see what part actually needs the capitalization changed. Because White House COVID-19 response team, that's actually a proper noun. So the B in briefing, and then these letters in public health officials, I can actually just select these and use this button to set it to lowercase. All right, so that's the right format, the right capitalization for that, but it is a title. And in the example we saw in the APA style website, the title of the press release, or in our analog, the press briefing, is italicized. Now, after that, in square brackets, we put press briefing, period, and then the link to the source itself. Now, you can do this with any public health official's press briefing or press conference, as the case may be, however they call that. You can do this with a statement that they've released, and it'll be very similar. Let me just take you back to the APA style guidelines there. So if we look at this range of things, so for someone's perspective, it's probably going to be some sort of gray literature. So, not peer-reviewed journal article or something like that. But if you are analyzing their remarks, perhaps they wrote a newspaper editorial, well, use the format that most closely corresponds to that. So for example, if someone wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and they have had many about current health conditions and public health practices, you can see how to format those depending on, this first one is for accessing it online. This second is for you read it in a print version. This next one could be either. So, all right, with that, let us talk about how you would cite this source. So let's head back, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my outline and I'm going to just paste it in here so we're keeping track of it. All right, so I've got my content areas, and if I am starting to write things up here, and I was going to be using this source, in this case, we want to introduce the person and their role, and we also want to cite it. So how are we going to cite it? Well, we're going to use the same author listed in a reference list, which is going to be White House 2021. Now, if we had more than one statement that you're using, and that's perfectly fine, just don't go overboard since it's only a two-page paper. If we had more than one source, from 2021, we'd just start lettering them 2021A, 2021B, etc. And so most of the time you'll have, if you're referring to something like this where the author of record is different from the speaker itself, whose views you're describing, you'll have something like Fauci stated that, or Fauci recommended. Now you can also have, let's say that you just have this one source that you're using. Now, this isn't incorrect, but it's not preferred because putting that citation in the middle of your sentence, in between the subject and the verb, it just interrupts the flow of ideas. So it's more preferable to have that at the end of the sentence, because then we get your whole argument. And if people decide, well, I would like to read their original text, you'd put it there. Let's do one more example here of something. So let's say that you were working, or you were uh, debating with the perspective from, say, a managed care environment. We're going to use Kaiser Permanente here as an example because it's one of the largest care providers in the United States. So as you can see, I have done a search for Kaiser Permanente press release, and this has come up as the very first result. And we see, oh, well, there's something that you may agree or disagree with. And news, so you're looking for something that, oh, here's an example of a statement on a public health related thing. So let's say that, let's go with this one here. So a little background. And so I was very fortunate that one of my aunts was the head of nursing at a major hospital in the San Diego region. And something that they did there is that they worked as a hospital to bridge with patients who are approaching that hospice stage to provide care in cooperation with the hospital at home. Now, there were a lot of arguments raised against it. And, you can't test things as efficiently, you can't provide care as quickly necessarily. Then you'll find pros and cons to this day, although it has become much more prevalent. But let's just say that this was something that you were going to be debating. So if we look at this here, we have the same information that we were looking for earlier. Where is this coming from? Well, we have the Kaiser Permanente, that's the organization, the corporate author. We have the title and subtitle here, expanding access to hospital care at home. Kaiser Permanente, Mayo Clinic announced investment Medi-Cali home. When was this released? May 13, 2021. And then we've got all the arguments there that you can refer to there. So how would you cite this and how would you refer to it? Well, the citation is going to be quite the same as the example we looked at earlier, but let's go ahead and go through the process of how to refer to this. So again, we're looking at a press release. If you were using a source that happened to be coming from a publication on a blog or a newspaper or something like that, just make sure you use the appropriate thing here. But in this case, Kaiser Permanente, we don't put a comma in there. We just write it out, Kaiser Permanente, because it's an organizational name, not an individual one. It's going to be 2021. And that was on May 13th. And then we have the title here. I'm just going to do a copy and paste so we know we're going to have to clean up. So I paste. And that's definitely a little bit off. So we go ahead and select keep text only. And then there's a little bit that we need to delete there. But we can take this here and we italicize it. And in this case, this is a press release. So we put press release in square brackets. And then we also need a link. How would we set that? And if you are doing this sort of statement where you're just discussing something and then indicating the source, it would be parentheses Kaiser Permanente, comma 2021. All right, I hope that is helpful for you. We have many more webinars that are coming up this term, and of course the large archive that we showed you online. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the Writing Center. And with that, I will say, have a good rest of the day.